there's something called political correctness, and all my friends are afraid of speaking up because they know that if they say anything wrong, they might lose their job and they might start losing their friends and families. So there has been this fear in the society for a very long time. And this is what I tell my American and Canadian friends today, that while they might claim that they have the freedom of speech, they probably have less freedom of speech today than people in East Asia have. What happened to Charlie Kirk is not the kind of things that happen.
Before we dive in, a quick whisper about today's sponsor, Ghost Founder. You know that moment when an idea jumps from someday to why not today? Ghost Founder lives in that moment. Ghost Founder takes the sketch from your napkin, gives it a heartbeat, and walks it out into the world. Fast. While everyone else is still writing pitch decks, the ghosts are wiring prototypes, lining up seed investors, and tuning your ops. Product market fit isn't just a hope, it's an outcome. If you're the kind of renegade who refuses to wait for permission, visit ghostfounder.com. Because around here, we scope things, build things, and fund things, in that order. Ghost Founder, the quiet engine behind loud breakthroughs. Today, we're sitting down again with Jayant Bhandari, one of the most thought-provoking voices we've had on our show. In our last conversation, Jayant challenged us to rethink freedom, truth, and the role of culture in shaping society. And since then, we've had the chance to join him in Vancouver at his Capitalism and Morality Conference just last month, where voices like Rick Rule, Maxime Bernier, Stephan Kinsella, and Amy Wax, and others, push the boundaries of our debate. And today we're diving deeper into East and West, freedom and fences, and how truth-seeking plays out in real life. Jayant, welcome back. Thank you so much for taking the time again.
Lovis and Jason, thanks very much again for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited. So cool. Now we get to speak to you twice. So, Jayant, just to kick us off, right? It's been about a year since we spoke last, I think. So I just wanted to ask, time flies, but in this period, how have you been, and what are some things that have been on your radar since we last spoke? Anything new that has left an impression on how you view the world?
The world is moving fast towards instability. And in a way, I'm happy that Trump is the president of the US. I have been a bit of a fan of Trump. Not that he's a saint or not that he's the perfect guy to be the president, but compared to the other alternatives, I'm really pleased that he's the president. But moreover, the thing that matters to me most is that he has a mind of his own. He thinks for himself and he speaks out what he thinks, rather than so many robotic people who have no views of their own, who basically regurgitate the same stuff that the peers they have say.
Okay, so when you say that you're glad Trump is at the helm, it's from you want the West to do well, right? Like you want the West to weather this period of instability in a good way. That is good for everyone if they can do that. I'm assuming.
Absolutely, I want the West to delay its degradation to as much as possible. Now, the fact that the West will continue to degrade is baked in the cake. There will be a civil war, there will be massive social conflicts, but because of the right policies, some of the right policies that Trump has, I think the degradation will get slowed down and get delayed. But again, after 2 years or 3 years, things will revert back to the Biden era, and gates of the country will open again, and demagoguery will kickstart again as well.
Whoa. So when you say civil war, do you mean in the US or do you mean in the West in general, like maybe Europe and America splitting up? What do you mean when you say that?
I think a civil war is inevitable in the whole of the Western society. And the reason, Jason, is that only homogeneous societies manage to stay stable. Homogeneous societies are the only societies that have a hope of having high trust. The US is now close to 50% people of European ethnicity, which means that there are now so many people from all over the world living in the United States. And when things are good, all is good. But when things start getting a bit shaky, social conflicts will emerge very rapidly. When the tide goes out, you will see the rough surface of the society, and there will be a civil war, primarily because, Jason, ethnic Europeans are not tribally minded. These are the people who have risen over centuries above a tribal and mindset, the mindset of kinship and groups. They think more in terms of seeking the truth rather than catering to what is good for their groups. Whereas people of the third world simply don't get it. They are not interested in truth. They are interested in catering to demagoguery and catering to what they think would please their groups.
Lovis, this is so interesting, right? Because just last night I sent you that tweet. I don't know. Do you guys know this? Is she a congresswoman? She just put out a tweet yesterday, I think, in response to the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and not only that, but also the response of other people in the United States that are celebrating this guy getting killed. And she wrote something that, because from my knowledge, not having lived in America, I think she's pretty popular, right? And I've got this tweet here. I'll just read it to you. She said, "There's nothing left to talk about with the left. They hate us. They assassinated our nice guy who actually talked to them peacefully, debating ideas. Then millions on the left celebrated and made clear they want all of us dead. To be honest, I want a peaceful national divorce. Our country is too far gone and too far divided, and it's no longer safe for any of us." Then she goes on. It's a pretty long tweet, but I guess what she means here when she says, "I want a peaceful national divorce," Jayant, is that what you are referring to here?
Well, I don't think a divorce is possible because people are all intermingled with each other in terms of a space. And urban areas are now predominantly people of non-European ethnicity. So you can pretty much look for any random city in North America or actually anywhere in the Western world. And I cannot think of any city which is not, which does not have a majority of people of non-European ethnicity. Without control over cities, you can't really run the modern economy. So I think what the West is headed towards is a civil war, and that is inevitable. The only hope would be for the Western society to completely close its gates for immigration and also encourage a massive number of people to leave the West. And this is why I think people who are in support of re-migration is it re-immigration or remigration, whatever they call it, is actually the most valid and most peaceful path to avoiding a conflict. But when you have close to half of your population made up of people who will be on one side of the civil conflicts, you can't really expect all those people to leave the US within the next few years. I think what will actually happen is that they will vote to bring back a person like Biden in 3 or 4 years' time. Sorry, 3 years' time now. And also demographically, the US will have shifted by then. You have millions of new voters from the of the kind who vote for the leftist parties joining the voting list. So the majorities of European people is falling very rapidly in the US and elsewhere in the West.
So in a way, I mean, thinking about cause and effect on all this, right? I always think that incentives have many unforeseen, like the law of unforeseen consequences, basically, right? So when I try to just look through what you're saying a bit, and then so echoing kind of what Hoppe said in one of his books, if you dismantle the welfare state, a lot of the incentive for immigration, be it legal or otherwise, right, may go away or may go by the wayside. So, and when I think about that, then I think about, Doge, like Elon and Trump trying to cut deeply into government budgets, but it seemed like that they had some successes, but overall, it doesn't sound to me like it was the breakthrough success that they were hoping for.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely, Lovis. It isn't going to work because more than 50% of Americans vote for the welfare system. Because they vote for the welfare system, how can you reduce the welfare system with those people voting into the system?
right.
Now, clearly, Trump would have, I think, wanted to reduce the welfare payments. But as you can see with Dodge, all they could try to do was to cut down some of the costs. There's no way they can cut down on welfare payments, money that is going to people individually. If Trump tries to cut down those payments, you can be absolutely sure there will be protests on the streets in the US tomorrow morning.
Yeah. And we're seeing protests already for all kinds of things. There's the National Guards deployed to different cities. It's a bit unclear to me whether that is truly because of safety or if there's something else, some other agenda behind it that might be more changes in financial policy or whatnot. But it's super hard to know with this stuff, right? You can only speculate.
But I guess one thing we can say from all these things is the instability in the system is growing, right? Nobody would deploy the National Guard to cities if things were super peaceful.
Yeah. And this before this assassination, right? And then the crazy thing is, so I'm almost completely off social media in my normal day to day, so I didn't see it at all. Jason actually told me about it. He's like, "Oh, did you see?" And I was like, "What? No, I hadn't seen." So then,
you mean what about the assassination?
Yeah, about the assassination.
Mm-hmm.
But then within a few days, right? So now stuff is on my feed, and it's so difficult to tell. There's a lot of celebration and hate. There's a lot of grief, but then there's also a lot of like, oh, this was all fake, right? This was all staged. They killed the role. They didn't kill the man, etc. And then there is some pretty. It's to the point where it's not distinguishable for me whether or not it's AI generated, CGI, or whatnot, right? So all this to contribute. Who at the end when I think about it, I'm like, well, who cares? What's truth? The point is, this is working to divide us, right? In either case. So if it was all fake by somebody, then their goal would clearly be division. If it was real, then it was also the goal was division, right? So it's at a point where it almost doesn't matter, which is pretty staggering.
Into Jayant saying about multiculturalism, right? It's also the way a culture reacts to a situation uniquely because of its culture. And when you have in a system where there's a lot of extra buffer, you can then get different cultures to live together and it's okay. But once you start getting squeezed, then people start to revert. And Jayant, am I on the right track here?
Yeah. Also, I think Jason, because of this diversity, because you have a diversity as a given, the political and social process is such that political correctness becomes very important in the US. Schooling systems become propaganda machines because now you have more than 50%, and actually in this case, more than 50% people on average in schools from non-European backgrounds. So it creates all kinds of conflicts and lack of trust within the society. It also creates lack of trust within people of every kind. So even within people of European ethnicity, it will create low trust because that is the mechanism, that is a cultural mechanism that happens when the overweening culture is of low trust. It permeates the psyche of people, and that's how they conduct with each other, even if Otherwise, they would have conducted themselves in a high trust fashion. So I think that is what's happening in the US. And I don't see how uh, Trump can do achieve anything else than delay the complete breakdown of the social system in the US.
And when you say US, I would say the trends are pretty similar in most Western countries, right? Not only the
Uh,
US. If you talk about
mm,
Canada, you talk about even Australia and most of Europe, Western Europe, right?
Absolutely, Jason. And also, the US is the spine of the Western world, whether you accept it or not. US is the spine. And if the US goes, everything else will fall apart. European countries don't really have capabilities to defend themselves. So is probably the case with Canada and Australia. So these people are dependent on the US. And if the US goes, everything in the West will go. Clearly, in my view, Western people, people of European ethnicity, are the fountainhead of civilization.
Giant, you just got cut off for a moment just now. So you were saying they are the fountainhead of civilization, and then you got cut off.
Yeah. So the civil war, in my view, will happen at some point of time, and a lot of people of non-European ethnicity will either leave or they will suffer in the civil conflicts. This will not be a fun moment for most people, including for people of European ethnicity.
Do you think that a little bit of this is just the cycles, right? Where there's this meme with what is it? Soft men bring hard times make hard men bring good times, and it that's an oversimplification, but there's something to this historic cycle where the West has had it very good for very long, pretty peaceful period, pretty prosperous period, and this is just kind of inevitably what comes next.
Well, Lovis, everything gets old with time. Japan has become a bit oldish. Korea has become a bit oldish. Singapore and Hong Kong have become oldish with time. But what the West has done is that they have done irreparable damage to themselves by destroying their homogeneity. So their core society is no longer the society that they had in the past. So Japan, Singapore, Korea, even if they have become oldish in terms of cultural values, in fact, in the sense that people might have got habituated to prosperity and might have become intellectually lazy with time. The fact is that these people, when they wake up, they'll hit the road the right way. They will restart the process. Whereas the problem with the Western society is that they actually have people in their societies who don't fit in, who don't want to fit in, and who actually have a psychology which goes against the Western ethos. And this is actually a product of what Jason was talking about, which is that there are a lot of people who are celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk. I mean, that's absolutely outrageous. I mean, I don't want anyone to be murdered, whether that person is a woke or a leftist or a conservative. I think what the Western ethos tell you is that you should be able to come out in the open and discuss verbally what you believe in, rather than assassinate other people. Uh, Killing other people is the ethos of the woke people. These are the people who are amoral, who don't believe in anything, and they don't really have an argument on their side. So the only way out for them is to assassinate other people.
I wonder, right, Giant Lovis, whether we're at some sort of a pivotal moment in history because this, when Trump nearly got assassinated, not so many people commented to me about the topic. But this time, I have friends in Australia, friends in Singapore. They're messaging me saying that it's really impacting them very hard. Like they don't, it's like they're trying to understand why this has happened. They feel like, hey, they don't identify with somebody like a Trump, but they could identify with somebody that was around their age, just trying to have discussions on difficult topics, right? So I think, Giant, what you said about America being a spine, And the whole idea of America is, I think, built around this thing called free speech and the ability to share ideas and to discuss them. And when something like that gets ended so violently, I think it's a real shock to everybody's psychology of what is the society we're living in, right?
Yeah, and that, Jason, that fear has been in the US and Canadian society for a very long time. There's something called political correctness, and which all my friends are afraid of speaking up uh,
Hmm.
because they know that if they say anything wrong, they might lose their job and they might start losing their friends and families. So
Yeah.
there has been this fear in the society for a very long time, and this is what I tell my American and Canadian friends today, that while they might claim that they have the freedom of speech, they probably have less freedom of speech today than people in East Asia have, where what happened to Charlie Kirk is not the kind of things that happen.
Yeah, I think that's a nice segue, Jayant. Before we go into East Asia for some more uplifting thoughts, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about your most recent installment of your seminar, Capitalism and Morality. And so, given the chance that you're the host of it all, what surprised you the most in this installment? Was there any particular idea that you walked away with that really stuck out?
Yes, and that has nothing to do with the seminar, Lovis. My seminar got started more than half an hour late because the IT guy wasn't there. The IT guy arrived 35 minutes late. There was no coffee available in the morning. And this is the kind of dysfunctionality you should expect. And I tell you, Canada is becoming increasingly dysfunctional because of the kind of people you bring into the society. Now, you can't trace that dysfunctionality to an individual here, because what happens, why dysfunctionality happens is because thousands of people or hundreds or tens of people make micro compromises, small compromises that start making happening, small cracks exist throughout the system, and the system keeps breaking down all the time, and you can't really pinpoint where that the critical area where that breakdown of the system happened. So usually what you have in the Western society, what I assume expect in a good organization, is redundancies, which is that people at the operational level take initiative to figure out what they should be doing, how they should be doing, even if they are not properly told. So that creates redundancies. Or there would be other people who are very motivated to do their job, and they would ensure that these things don't happen, even if it is not their responsibility to do these kind of things. So unfortunately, dysfunctionality is increasingly become a part of the Canadian um, fabric, and things will fall apart, is keep falling apart. Things will keep going wrong. Planes will fall off the sky, and you won't be able to know why they fell off the sky. So unfortunately, that is in a very interesting manner the most interesting part of this seminar. And my prediction is, Lovis, that your electricity and internet will become unstable with time. And the reason is that there are thousands, literally thousands of people involved in the process of producing electricity, in fact, producing coal or uranium or whatever, to that electricity getting to you. Any weak link in this process will create problems for you, and those problems already exist. The system for now is so good and so full of redundancies that those problems don't happen. But eventually they will come to surface as well. I wouldn't be surprised if they start happening within the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah, I mean we've seen some system level events already, right? Not long ago, all of Portugal and 2/3 of Spain went black, right? And it's interesting because so living in Germany, I have no recollection of blackouts or brownouts. But there's many reasons for that, right? And then when I moved to the US to study in 2008-9 timeframe, in the summer, it's actually quite common because it's so hot. Everybody's running their AC 24/7, and so the load in the system is so high. And when you go out in the street, the infrastructure, many places, it looks like you're in Thailand, right? It's just telephone pole, like wooden poles and wires strung everywhere. And I always thought to myself, I was like, wow, it's so much neater in Germany. So Germany's making a whole other size of mistakes. I'm not saying one or the other. I'm just saying it has actually been like blackouts have been part of the American experience for a long time, and it's very. I think this must be very rare in a first world country to have such a tolerance for systematic failure like that.
Yeah, and Lovis, Germans and Swiss are very perfectionist people. They really do a good job, and that is why the watches that are made in Switzerland or some of the high technology stuff, mechanical stuff that gets made in northern part of Europe cannot be copied elsewhere. I remember my dad used to have a Swedish printing machine, and I got my dad to buy an exact copy of that made in India for 1/5 of the price. And it was exactly the same copy. However, a small cog would break down one day, and then a chain will break the other day, or electrical wire would burn out someday. And eventually the machine wasn't working, and we had to throw away the machine. We had to sell it for junk. And that is what happens. And this is why Sweden, the whole of North Europe and Switzerland are so good, because these people are perfectionists, and they do such a good job. I worked for a Swiss company for 2-3 years, and if a cable was loose somewhere, the CEO would come down and make sure it was at the right place. And I used to, that wasn't something. I found it a bit hilarious. But now I understand that when you operate in a complex system, you have to take care of every small things, because then if you have a million of things that can go wrong, even if there's a very low risk, you don't want those things to go wrong.
Yeah. So with what you asked me in the beginning, right? So actually, so speaking of risk, right? So many people assess risks wrong, and I think Nassim Taleb writes about this quite a bit with the Black Swan events. And so I've had a really firsthand experience recently, right? On my way home from your conference, I assumed that being denied entry in the US was a very, very low probability event, which it is, right? It's a super low probability event for me in my situation with my passport, etc. But that doesn't mean that the outcome is not catastrophic for my life, right? So I'm okay. I'm just saying I made a misjudgment because I kind of the probability is so low. So in my mind, it was a low risk, right? But it's not. It's a huge risk, very impactful event. The risk of occurrence is small, but that's not the same thing. And it's very easy to mistake the two, right? And so I think this is how this then happens, that you get these system level failures. People are like, the chance of this happening is a fraction of a percent. And it's like, yeah, but if it does happen, you're screwed. so you need to have these perfectionists looking into that, right? That there's no other way.
And Western society is so complex that you can't really have people in your chain of command or at operational level who make micro compromises. Because these micro compromises compound and will make your society extraordinarily dysfunctional eventually. As you rightly said, US very likely already is in certain ways dysfunctional, and Europe will get there, because so far at the operational levels, there were probably not enough people from the third world. But their culture will hit the operations eventually.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it in several places, I think.
Jayant, so you've been traveling extensively in East Asia as well. So when you say, people from the north of Europe can do something and copy, you often say copying is hard, right? So in India, you buy this printing machine for a fifth of the cost, but then it ends up wasting you money because you can't get it to work properly.
Yeah.
How is your experience like for, say, Japan or China or Korea when you compare that to India? Because they are also 50, 60 years ago were very far behind the curve, but then they've caught up so massively. And in some areas, some people would even argue that they are at the forefront now. So what's your view on these things?
Well, Japanese are actually in many ways very similar to Germans and Swiss in terms of their commitment to work. They are devoted to their work, and you don't really, from what I see, and I have spent a lot of time in Japan and Korea and China. What I see is that these people have a pride associated with their work. They are not constantly thinking about whether their bosses are overlooking them or not. They still want to do a good job, and I think in that is why Japan, Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, China, Taiwan have become so prosperous. They are among the most stable, most prosperous countries in the world today. Of course, China is still emerging, but it will eventually become a very prosperous country for the simple fact, Jason, that people at a very low level of operations in China look motivated. Now they might not be feeling the same thing inside, but they look motivated enough that when when I ask them for something, they have a smile on their face and they want to do their job. And that's what matters at the end of the day. As Lovis can probably confirm, and I spent a lot of time in Germany and Switzerland. A lot of workers in Switzerland and Germany are under a huge amount of pressure. But at the end of the day, the pride in their work makes them do the right thing. So they will accept the pressure. They might hate their bosses, they might hate their companies. But in the end, when they are doing some work, they know that it is almost like a religious exercise for them, that what they are doing should be done right. And that is what I think is happening in China today. The reason why some of the very high technology equipment are now being made in China. Um, a lot of electronics that we now use comes from China. A lot of mechanical things are starting to come from China. So China is emerging because though they're all big organizations, they're mega organizations work, and they work because the individual there is fired up to do what is right, irrespective of whether he's bossed around or not. And some of their bosses are not really the nicest people. They don't treat their workers the best way, but it's still because the culture inculcates pride in their work, the fact that they should look at their work as a service to God in a way, that they do a good job irrespective of who is overlooking them.
Yeah, my feeling visiting China there with Jason was that they absolutely they have the self-respect in a sense, because in a way, if you have pride in your own work, also has to do with that I think has a lot to do with self-respect in a sense, because it's like, yeah, this may not be my perfect situation, but I'm going to make the best of it, right? And I'm going to produce a valuable outcome here. And so this, I think, is one thing. And the other thing is my my feeling was the emotion is that they really care about who's in front of them. So maybe all kinds of things are happening, and I think you mentioned this as well in Vancouver. They may not express it so much like some Westerners do with this like almost over politeness, but they show you their appreciation by just doing a good job, right? It's like, hey,
Yeah,
you need
Lovis.
help. You need help, I'll help you, right? There's no, it's
Yeah,
not, yeah.
Yeah, Lovis, I remember once I was in Zurich at a coffee shop, a very, very busy place. This was a coffee shop at the Hyatt Hotel, which was very busy. A lot of people were there. And I asked for a latte. The barista made me a latte. And there was a drop of coffee on the plate of the coffee cup. So she came running after me after she had given me, because she spotted that drop of coffee on my plate. And she came after me saying, Sir, let me change this because there's that drop of coffee on the plate. And I said, I don't really care about it, but I can't stop admiring that issue, because here is this person, a young girl, working at a relatively difficult job because there's so much pressure from other people. Uh, I immediately thought that if I were in her position, I would not have done what she did. But I respect her because in her position, she did the right thing. And strangely, the second time that happened, the same thing happened to me was in Singapore. I was once visiting Singapore and I experienced exactly the same thing. And I realized that you can inculcate pride in your work among people who then independently do the right thing, whether they believe in the company or the bosses or not.
And they do it when nobody else is watching, right? I think that's the beautiful thing, is they're doing it not from a position of fear from an external source, but actually with a relationship with themselves, because they go, I am not me as identity barista. I'm not going to serve somebody with a drop of coffee on the saucer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exactly the same among Europeans as well. I have experienced an enormous amount of generosity and good work from Europeans. So where we started this conversation was on about the dysfunctionality that is emerging because Western people have brought in a lot of third world people who do not believe in looking at their work as a religious, as if they are serving God. They want to be done with their work and go home, make their money and go home. They have no interest in whether that product works for you or not, because that's not a part of their cultural milieu. And that is why, where they come from, are third world countries, and they participate in converting the West into the third world, because they can't give up on this cultural factor, which is that they don't care.
So many so many ripple effects from these facts, right? It just ripples through all of society. Jayant, so at your conference, you gave a speech that I would say was very, very captivating. I was supposed to be looking around for people with questions, but I ended up just being too distracted by you giving that great talk. So, could you give our audience a summary of what that talk was about? What was the crux of the speech? And why did you find it important to give it at your own conference this year?
Jason, a long time back, I decided, having spent a fair bit of my time in the Western society, that I wanted to speak the truth. I wanted to believe in the truth, and I wanted to speak the truth, and I would be searching for truth for the rest of my life. Now, the society that I grew up in does not have the same definition of truth. For them, truth is about whatever gets you ahead of the crowd. So you lie and you say that you're speaking the truth. So truth has different meaning in the society I grew up in. But I started to learn the meaning of truth in the West. And I wanted to speak the truth about what I have seen, experienced in China over my many visits to China over the last 16 years. What I have seen is a society which is rapidly changing culturally and economically. Economically, it's growing, of course, which everyone has to accept, because it has grown from a few $100 per capita GDP to now $13,000 per capita GDP. So this is a country that is growing very rapidly. But what I have seen is that culturally, that country is changing very rapidly as well, which for me is the higher order factor which defines the future of a society. Because if you are culturally becoming better people, then those higher order factors will show up at surface in the long term. Those things might take decades, but it also tells me that Chinese growth and Chinese stability is there for the medium term, and China will continue to grow. So this is what I wanted to pass on to my audience, fully recognizing that Western people have been heavily propagandized against China. Now, China is not a perfect country. I'm absolutely sure a lot of bad things happen in China as they happen elsewhere in the world. However, in many, many ways, China is a lot better country than what it is perceived to be by very educated and open minded people in the West. Now, these people would not look negatively at China by themselves. They are very open minded and generous people. But the problem is that they have been so heavily propagandized by their bureaucrats in Washington and the international media that they carry this negative image, which is now hardwired in their minds. So, as you saw, Jason, there was one person who started, who couldn't hold himself back from, I would say, disturbing my speech. He wanted to raise the something about one child policy or whatever else. Now, I wasn't talking about what was happening in China 40, 50, 60 years back. I was talking about what has been happening in China for the last 2 or 3 decades. And the fact that that country has actually continued to improve. And when it comes to Chinese fearing the government, I now consistently see that people in China are not afraid of the policeman. They look into the eyes of the policeman and talk with him because they are not so afraid. They have not experienced heavy-handedness by the government. Now, of course, there's a fear of Beijing. I'm not denying that, but then all I wanted to talk about was that China was a far, far, far better society than what a lot of those people think it is.
Yeah, so just kind of echoing some of these points that you made, what I find interesting is when talking to Chinese via either because they speak English or via Jason, when we were there, I really pushed to ask them some tough questions, right? Or what I thought would be tough questions. So I would ask them like kind of the podcast questions, like, well, what does freedom mean to you? And do you feel free? And, what I kind of try to tease out where these boundaries are. And it really looks to me that they enjoy more freedom for the daily things that one would care about than I feel I do. And that's quite interesting, right? So they're like, yeah, of course I can't go demonstrate in Chinese about Xi Jinping, but when is that ever really important, right? You can,
Yeah,
because
but also, Lovis, should you be allowed to go in public and protest anyway? I think it's violence against other people in public when you go and protest there because you disturb their livelihood, their movement in public. So I'm against. I think as a libertarian, I'm against. Public protests. You could stand on the sidewalk and maybe hold a banner or something, but when you
right.
talk about getting into big groups to obstruct traffic and create a ruckus, that is violence.
It's interesting that you say that, Giant, because a lot of people in the West would beat their chest and say, "Hey, look how good we have it in our society. We are allowed to do that."
Well, Jason, if three of us went to a street and started protesting, I guarantee you, police will come and take us away. Even in the Western society, they don't take people away when there are 500 of them. So it
Well,
is
and
not as simple as what a lot of people make it out to be.
No, and in Germany, for example, you have to register your demonstration, you have to get a permit for it, etc. Right? So that's already a gate. And if there is a security cost associated with it, then you might be asked to cover these costs, for example. So that's what I mean. It's very relative, right? And
So
I'm not a demo goer, right? I've never been, so it's never been important to me. I care about a lot of other things, and it seems like these things, like freedom to go do business and upholding contractual law and stuff like that, that seems to work extremely well in China, right?
yes, and the thing is that now, again, going back to my seminar, the
Mhm.
the the university no longer believes that the police will protect the audience of the conference. So they want me to explain the security issues to do with the seminar so that they can bring in enough security guards. So unfortunately, here protesters clearly, it seems, have an upper hand, that the police cannot be trusted to come on time or even come to help you out, and protesters have sort of a free hand to create disturbances.
Hmm. I mean, specifically in Vancouver, they're probably busy with the goings on Hastings Street, which I I have to tell you, Jayant, I've never seen that, and Jason took me down that street just to kind of just let me see it firsthand, and it's hard for me still to fathom. I don't understand
Yeah.
how the local uh, authorities, but also the people that live there. I do not understand how they tolerate it, and they just walk around it as if it's nothing, right? And just to paint a picture for people who haven't been, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. It's a very long street. It used to be a very prosperous street, beautiful houses lining the street on both sides, going down to the ocean front. And maybe along the whole street, who knows, maybe 10,000 people that are homeless. But that's not even the main issue. The main issue is that they are drugged out of their minds, but to the point where they can't talk, they can't walk, they soil themselves. They're just there. They're not violent because they're so high that they don't even know what's going on. And I thought it really left an impression on me. I felt really bad for these poor souls, but at the same time, I'm like, which policy creates this? Which incentive is at play here to create this? This is not good.
Yeah, and Lovis, you can get a free shot on that street of some of the drugs if you wanted to get,
Right.
and then they turn
Why is it
around
free,
and blame
Giant?
China.
Why is it free?
Well, I don't really, I'm not into, maybe it's legitimate, maybe that helps, but the government actually provides you a free shot if you needed a free shot of whatever. I'm not into drugs. I hardly drink, Jason, so
Yeah.
I don't really understand these things. But then they turn around and blame, including Trump. Now I'm here criticizing Trump, that then they turn around and blame China for supplying fentanyl. Uh, hey, I can get fentanyl wherever I want to in North America. Why can't you control it? And
Right.
why are you blaming China for everything?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Correct.
I just thought to ask when I said it's free. I just wanted to ask you that because I think if we were to tell this to our audience that are, let's say, not from the West, it's hard for them to believe. Like, for example, my friends in Singapore, it's a capital punishment in Singapore to bring in drugs, and here you have a government in the Western world where even up to today, people find Canada to be a respectable country. So if when I came back to Germany and told people here and told friends in Singapore that this was how it was, they just flat out don't believe me. They say, no, how can a government do that? No way. Right.
Yeah,
So
and Jason, it's the same with me when I tell them Koreans or Japanese or Chinese about these things, and I tell them about the pride parades or the sexualization of children that happens in the Western society today in schools. They can't believe it. They don't think that can actually happen. It's just
Yeah.
so alien to them.
Yeah. So I told it to a friend in Germany who's a nurse, and she's like, "Oh yeah, these are all patients in a drug replacement therapy program." And I'm like, "Right, that's what's
Yeah.
happening." She's like, "Oh, we do that in Germany too." I was like, "Oh, please don't tell me that." That's That's horrible. But I didn't see that. I mean, the doctor must have not been in because, I mean, yeah. Anyway, it's the amount of mental gymnastics the brain goes to, I guess, to deal with this, right? Because it is traumatic when you see it. You're like, what is happening here? And then the mental gymnastics kicks in, and people somehow explain it away. Is nuts. Another thing that I wanted to touch on, the another way that I thought people were quite free in China is I asked them about COVID, right? Which was an event that really, everybody was impacted by either the virus or the policies, or both, in different proportions. And I asked them, I was like, well, how come China seemed to do so well in the beginning, but then towards the end, it became kind of the poster child in the West. They would say, oh, look, at least we're not as strict as China, because China had these very, very, it's like in places like Shanghai, not everywhere, but in some places had very draconian punishment for people breaking, curfew or whatever. And they say, yeah, it was a mistake. Beijing was wrong. They made a bad call. Maybe because they're all old dudes, right? They were scared, and so they made bad policy. And then as soon as they realized it, though, they completely rolled it back. And I think this is so different than what I would hear from somebody in the West, where they still to this day insist that the response was correct, right? Which, in my opinion, wasn't. In my opinion, everybody was wrong, basically. Uh, outside of Sweden, and I there doesn't seem to be a reckoning with that, right? It's like, no, the government decided they did the best they could, they did a good job. I'm like, in my opinion, they absolutely did not, right? So I think that gives you a glimpse of how much they can actually criticize the leadership, and how reflected they also are on some of the stuff that does go sideways.
Yeah, and this is also I talked with in my seminar, and I quoted this, that I asked a Chinese successful businessman, and I said, does Chinese government enable supply of fentanyl to the US? And his response right away was he wouldn't be surprised if the government actually enables that. So they are fairly self-critical. He doesn't know, of course, whether it is happening or not. But I find enough self-critical thoughts among Chinese. And this is, again, the another higher order factor, which makes me think that China is going to continue to do well in the future.
Jayant, since you're on that point, I just wanted to give you a couple of anecdotes. Recently they've had that Victory Day celebrations in China, right? And there was this picture going around the internet with Modi and Putin and Xi Jinping together, like doing a three-way handshake. And tons of people actually came to tell me that, it looks like it's good, these three countries can work together, and China will help India, and India will be the next China, and China will help India with building the train stations and the airports and the telecommunications. So in your talk, you talked a lot about China, and I think you titled it Demystifying China, if I remember correctly. Can you help our audience that probably are not super familiar with your work yet? Like, is it true that India will just follow 2 steps behind and one day be where China is today? And if so, if not, why are they wrong?
They are completely wrong in thinking that India will catch up with China, or even that India can continue to follow China two steps behind it. China is progressing. China is a country that is improving, whereas India is regressing to its pre-colonial past. India is falling apart. It's nothing works in that country. It is a country that is getting worse by the day, and everything that happens in that country tells me that India will get far worse than I can imagine. So these two countries cannot be compared. And anyone, and you have been, Jason, to both the countries, to China and India, I know that. Anyone who has been to the two countries knows that you should not be using China and India in the same sentence. They are different planets. They are different universes. There's no comparison. China will continue to grow, and a large reason is the cultural issue. The cultural issues take millennia to form into to a rational and moral system. Europe took 3 or 4 millennia to form its cultural backbone. India has not even started that process. China also started that a long time back, and it is still had to suffer a lot before it got somewhere. But India is, in my view, 4 millennia behind Europe in starting to form a cultural backbone. So India will continue to get worse. It will fall apart. It will fall into tribal pieces, and then these people will be eating brains of each other. So that's the future of India.
Yeah. So the bullet trains, Chinese bullet trains bringing people from Delhi to Mumbai in 4 hours is not something that you have on your radar, or
Well, so Jason, about 15 years back, Indian government and Japanese government is started working on a bullet train project actually from Ahmedabad to Mumbai. And that project was supposed to be completed in 5 years. Then after 5 years, they were still saying it would take another 5 years, and today they are still saying it would take another 5 years. China would have completed that project of about 400 kilometers in a few months' time, certainly in less than a year. So in India, it will still be another 5 years, and I guarantee you it will never get completed. And if it does get completed, you can be absolutely sure that those bullet trains will fly off the rails, uh, because you can't bring in Japanese to monitor every aspect of that train system. Indians will make micro compromises, which means that this train will start flying off the rails on day one. So no, it won't work. Right now, the metro systems in India create problems. They just recently instituted a metro system in Mumbai, which just stops in the air, and then people have to be rescued by the fire brigade, which of course takes another few hours to arrive, and they are dysfunctional by themselves. So no, bullet train will never take off in India. They claim that they have a high-speed train that runs at 150 kilometers an hour, but that's not true. It doesn't necessarily work very well, and it's not a vast improvement on what India had 20 years back.
Lovis, sorry, let me just ask one more question. I know I'm hogging Jayant a lot,
Sorry.
but Jayant, one other thing I wanted to ask, right? I've been to India quite a few times for work, and I feel like there's a big cultural difference amongst the people from different regions, and also with the language that they speak, their own local language, not just Hindi, right? Is it so? When you say culture and homogeneity is important, does India have homogeneity, or would you consider them to be an inhomogeneous country?
Oh, they're not homogeneous at all. It's a very multi-ethnic society. It's probably the most multi-ethnic society in the world. Now, being a multi-ethnic society is not a problem as long as those people have risen above their tribal affiliations. This is what I have seen, Jason. Japanese in America are among the best assimilated people in the American society, because they manage to rise above their tribal affiliations. They are people who start looking for truth when given a chance, and when your focus is on truth, not and when you are not anchored to uh, your race or tribal group, then being multi-ethnic is not a problem. Uh, Europe itself is a multi-ethnic society, but these days it manages to work all right. It doesn't really matter where they are from, because they have risen away over their tribal affiliations. Unfortunately, when you have lower IQ people who are stuck in their tribal affiliation, then you have that problem because of multi-ethnicity. And India is a multi-ethnic society, and it's a very low IQ society.
So, Jayant, yeah, for for China, right? We're talking about it still growing. The thing that I'm wondering about is when what will be the signs of kind of achieving or seeing peak China? So I've talked to Jason about this, and the best we can come up with is that because of China's millennia of history of culture, the current rise that we're seeing is more like a reversion to the mean than a new height in a way. What do you think about that?
I sort of agree with that. I think China is lacking in one thing, and which is that they have not underpinned their society and institutions by philosophy and the concept of ideas, the kind of liberty that exists in the mainstream classical Western society. And I think China has to work towards underpinning their society with those elements eventually. They are a very smart people. So they have, starting with Japan, Far East Asia copied the best of the Western society. This is what happened in the mid of the 19th century when Japanese started copying German and British society. And that has continued. China has been a big beneficiary of copying what was the situation in Japan, Taiwan, Singapore. Uh, in fact, from what I know, Deng Xiaoping was a good friend of Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, because Xiaoping wanted consulting work done by Lee Kuan Yew. So in many ways, Chinese cities actually look like Singapore to me. So China copied a lot, and copying is not easy. It takes a lot of intelligence to copy. If you could copy, then Africa and India and Latin America would be as good as China is. So copying is not easy. Never look down at copying. Copying, everything we know is copied. Most of the things we know is copied anyway. Our languages are copied. We learn from people around us. We copy uh, how we live, what we eat. So most of what we consume and use in our lives is copied anyway. Do not look down at copying. Chinese have done a very good job. But my issue is whether Chinese will be able to underpin their society with this 0 to 1, which is philosophy, ideas, the Western concept of liberty eventually, because they might not be capable of creating original ideas right now. So they have created probably better fighter planes today. They might have created uh, a very high level artificial intelligence system, DeepSeek. But the original idea was still a Western idea. Can they create their own ideas? But I wouldn't worry about that if I were Chinese, because that is still uh, maybe 10 or 20 years before that starts limiting their progress. China clearly, in my view, is headed to where Japan is, or probably ahead of Japan. China, in my view, is probably more creative than even Singapore is today. And I know that might come as a shock to a lot of people, but dealing with people in Shanghai and Shenzhen and Singapore tells me that because of whatever is happening in China, Chinese young people are probably more innovative, more open minded, and more creative. So China will continue to grow, continue to improve for the next 10, 20, 25 years before it hits that glass ceiling. My guess is, Lovis, that China will have underpinned its society by the concept of ideas and philosophy by then. The truth is that as you rightly mentioned, I feel very free in China. I don't feel as if my movements are hindered. I have been to small villages in China. I don't see anyone hindering my movements in those places. So Chinese society I feel very free in China. So I would not be surprised if also a lot of very smart people from the Western society start moving to China. China has started something called Visa K. Jason, correct me if I'm wrong there, but that visa enables smart young people to move to China without a job, which is a unique kind of visa of its own kind in the world. So China probably understands that it needs that bunch of creative people, and it's enabling migration of such people to China.
Jayant, you have concerns about the West allowing all these different foreign cultures coming in because it can impact the culture that is there. So, while I don't have that fear for China, what are your thoughts with them sort of opening their borders like that and allowing people to come in?
So, so Jason, I have spent a lot of time in Japan. My clients and I invest in Japanese companies. And I was talking with a Japanese CEO, and he told me that for the first time they are having to take theft insurance because Japan has brought in a lot of foreigners recently to help them with certain jobs, and thefts have taken off in Japan. Now, those people who don't know Japan, in Japan, you don't lock your bikes. Your kids of 3, 4, or 5 years age walk on cross the street by themselves. So Japan is a very safe and good society, but now because of migrants, Japanese culture, Japan is starting to feel some problems. Here is the good thing about the Western society: they do not give out their Far East Asian societies. They do not give out their passports. If you're born in Japan or China, and if you have lived there for 3 generations, I don't think you are still eligible to get their passports. And that is a mistake that the Western society did, which is that they started giving out their passports too easily. And so that's what the response to your question is, Jason. When Far East Asian society wakes up to the problem that the third world people bring, they can deal with that right away because they will not have given out their citizenship documents to these people. But moreover, the fear that they don't have the citizenship documents keeps them within certain boundaries.
Yeah, interesting. I think you're right. I mean, my wife isn't Singaporean, and even after having 2 kids in Singapore, it was still difficult for her to get a permanent residency. It's not even a passport. A permanent
Yeah, and
residency
that's
is time based in Singapore, right?
right. That's true. Yeah. Yeah,
So
and that's the way it should be, Jason. That's the way it should be. Now, of course, I immigrated to Canada, and I immigrated because I wanted to get their passport, and that was easy. So I immigrated to Canada. I moved to Canada for my convenience, not for the good of Canada. And I think all I can say is that Western countries should not be giving out their passports as easily as Canada or Australia or New Zealand give out.
So, hey, Jayant, let me just round back again to the Chinese and philosophy. So, Lovis might know this guy. We call him I brought him to a bar in Suzhou where I frequent, and he's a friend of mine. And Lovis calls him the philosopher, right?
Right.
So this guy, he says to me, there's no point in working super hard at a 9 to 5 job. I might as well work super hard at something I like. So he spends his time creating these insane cocktails, insane recipes, right? He travels to different parts of China to collect honey from Xinjiang, and he collects herbs from Yunnan, and he does all these amazing things, concoctions, and then he makes these cocktails, and every 2 months he goes on a 3-day hike into the mountains by himself with only a book on Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, right? So I'm not bringing this guy up to refute what you're saying, because I know exactly what you mean when you say that the underpinnings are different. But I just wanted to share with you that I'm starting to notice from my peers in China, and especially those that are maybe 10 years younger than myself, they have this. So let's say in the late 20s to mid 30s, they have this phenomenon now called tang ping, which means like to lie flat. And a lot of young people bring this up to say it's not that they are going to go on the street to beg for money, but it's what they're saying is, hey, I'm not going to take part in this corporate rat race. And the question is always, when I just push back a bit and say, hey, but why, like everybody in your country, they're working so hard, they're trying to get ahead in life, why are you stepping off to the side? And then they ask me back, why should I, like, what's in it for me, and for me this is something new, because I grew up in a very traditional Chinese family while I had an Australian dad, right? So the Chinese side doesn't ask why. They just do it. They have to do it because everybody else does it and they got told to do it, so they do it. So for me to now be in China and see a lot of younger people saying, no, first I need to know why before I do it, I think there might be the beginnings of this change. It's not that they don't want to work hard, but they want to know why before they do it. So I don't know, with your time there, have you noticed something like that as well?
Yeah, and Jason, that's what I said, that China must underpin that creativity within its within its structure over the next couple of decades. And I already see signs that people are interested in philosophy, interested in ideas, interested in the spiritual abstract world rather than just the material world. Chinese are great at operating in the material world. They probably do a better job at operating in the material world than the Western people do, because they are solely focused on the material world. But I think a spiritual, uh, uh, psychological awakening is happening, and this is what I see among the young people. So I completely agree with you, Jason. But only time will prove whether they will actually fully generate that or not. Because even today, the fountainhead of the spiritual values, the psychological values, the philosophy is the Western society. So I want to see that emergence happening in China before I'm reasonably sure that that can happen.
I'm trying to think where to take things next. It's been such a interesting discussion between you two. Quite happy to listen.
Lovis, in many ways, when I'm in China, because I'm of course dealing with the material world, when I'm in China, I'm not really there to discuss philosophy with new people. Although I have now several contacts with who I can discuss things the way I can discuss with people in the US or in Canada. So yes, I completely agree with you on that, Jason. But sometimes I even forget that I'm not in the US when I'm in China, because the highways are pretty much copies of US highways. The tunnels are copies of the US, and they are newer versions of that, so they are nicer and without potholes. And I've been to backward places, and the roads are pothole free. One thing that I have seen a major difference on in China is that the corruption level has almost disappeared in China. And again, this points me to the fact that China will continue improving for the next few decades. Most people in the Western world get stuck between whether a society is socialist or capitalist. Now, that's, in my view, limiting yourself about understanding people, because even socialism and communism are ideologies, but most of the world has no ideology. The third world has no ideology except to accept might is right is the only ideology they have. And that is where corruption is a big problem in the third world, because it has social acceptance. China had a lot of corruption 15 years back when I started going there. Today, people who are critical of Xi Jinping, I ask them, what about corruption? And they accept that corruption has almost disappeared from the Chinese society. And that gives me very strong confidence that China will continue to do better for the next couple of decades more before it has to start thinking about changing its political system or bringing in the spring of philosophy to underpin its society.
Yeah, I saw this longer article about that topic of corruption that within Chinese companies, there is a lot of incentives now to get rid of corruption because they understand now that that can only give you short-term wins, but it doesn't build a sustainable corporation. And so they're trying really hard to eliminate it. So in the corporate sector and in the government sector, of course, they have very draconian punishments at this point if you are found to be corrupt, right?
Yeah, and public sector people are no longer allowed to drink when they are on public sector business. And I'm told that corporations are now following the same policy. They don't let their people drink when they go out for business. And um, um, and so there is clearly a massive change happening. I was in a social function not very far back, and there was a very senior bureaucrat in that social function, and I was keeping an eye on him. I was wanted to see if he was going to drink or not. And he did not drink because he was driving his own car that day. He controls the city, so he could have easily got away with that, but he did not drink, and that's what impresses me about China.
Yeah, I mean, so much simpler level, right? When I was there in 2017, one thing that my wife and I noticed is that people were spitting on the street a lot for all kinds of reasons. And going back now, nobody's doing that anymore. Nowhere. It's
Well,
and I
I
asked
saw
Jason.
yeah, Lovis, I saw it about 2 months back, and it was shocking to me because I had seen it after many years, and I was in a very small area this time. But I completely agree. People line up. People don't spit anymore, and people are. I'm very much a foreigner to a lot of Chinese. Uh, they don't stare at me anymore. They are very polite. I'm absolutely sure they stare at me when I'm not looking at them, but they are polite enough not to stare into my eyes.
Yeah, but I'm really at a loss to even think how you can get that level of societal change in behavior because it takes a lot, right? It takes a lot of discipline and understanding to do that.
Well, Lovis, remember the IQ of Chinese is 105. They have the basic ingredients to copy things very quickly. And if you look at Chinese are very eager to learn the Western ways. If you look at Chinese in the Western society, they are eager to learn the Western ways, which includes learning hip hop as well, because they don't. At one point of time, you don't really know what is classic high quality Western behavior and what is low class Western behavior. So people copy all kinds of things. But so Chinese copy all kinds of things, but they are very focused on trying to learn good things. Particularly things like don't make noise in public, don't create a ruckus, don't create dirt around you. And they I think they are among the better assimilated people today.
So I'll give you guys some. You guys both don't read Chinese, right?
I don't.
Okay, so give you some funny anecdotes. So when I was on business trips in China, we would always be on these long drives, and you'd have to go to these highway stops. You know, like in Germany, the Autohofs, right? And so they've got these massive public toilets because there's just so many people. So you have urinals, maybe 4 rows of urinals. Each one is maybe 30 long, right? And it's all open air because it's so cold. You need the ventilation. So even when it's freezing, there's no heating. Okay. So anyway, every time you step up to relieve yourself at the urinal, there's actually a sign there. And I think it's like a play on the Armstrong quote when he landed on the moon, like one small step for man, one large step for mankind. And they write it in Chinese: one small step forward, one big step to become more cultured. Right? So I think in my Chinese, correct, the Chinese they use Wenming, right, to be more cultured. And I noticed that in a lot of public signage. So when you ask why they can change so quickly, they have this gravity, right, where they use this as a high point to motivate people to reach towards being more quote unquote cultured. And this is very different from when I'm in other countries and they say, please step forward, please don't make a mess, whatever. They don't tell you it's to become more cultured. They say, please don't do it because it's going to cause other people trouble, right? So I find that quite interesting because they're not being explicit about asking you to do something. They're trying to motivate you to do it out of your own will to become quote unquote more cultured. And I think it's the same with spitting. I think during COVID, they said, hey, we have this pandemic going on around. Let's not do that because it's bad for society. You spread germs, etc., etc. And people sort of self-corrected their behavior because they wanted to be part of this more cultured society. So I just found that pretty interesting whenever I read all these signage, right?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And by contrast, in the West, you get actually more of an attitude of no, if everybody's behavior is welcome, and we just have to kind of be okay with it because we're not allowed to criticize anybody, right?
Well, Lovis, when I started living in the UK in the early 90s, the culture was different. If you did not behave properly, you were told about it. I have memories of Swiss old women coming over to people who were playing loud music on their radio or something, telling them that she did not want to listen to them, and it was none of the business. It wasn't right for these people to play radio loudly in public. So those were the days when political correctness wasn't so big in the Western society. But somehow, I think Western society has become, uh, um, the euphemism is tolerance. It's not tolerant. They are just become, in a way, apathetic. They don't want to fight for their society anymore. And I think they need to register that if they don't fight for their society, they will lose their civilization, which is what's happening.
So, Jayant, I have almost like a final question maybe for you. And so you've mentioned a lot that you are a seeker of truth, but I really find it more and more difficult to discern what is truth these days, right? So what do you have a heuristic of or a test that you apply? Like how do you know when something's true, and how do you find truth?
Well, I mean, I'm just a seeker, which does not mean I will have figured out the truth eventually. Did Charlie Kirk exist? No, I don't know for sure, but I'm reasonably sure it happened. Did America land on moon? Yes, I'm reasonably sure it did. Is the planet a, a shape of a ball? I'm reasonably sure that's true. I think I don't want to be a contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian and say that, hey, Earth is flat and man never landed on moon. But I think you can reach a reasonable level of truth through a statistical way and probability based way of thinking. That if I have heard about Charlie Kirk from so many sources, then I'm reasonably sure that this guy existed and he was murdered.
Jayant, then my last question for you, okay? Thanks for giving us so much of your time. So you seek truth, but to seek truth, I think it's important to have the freedom to seek the truth. So the space and the time, because if you're rushing and you don't have enough sleep and you're trying to juggle 3 jobs and you're trying to put food on the table, you don't have much time to maybe sieve through all these noise to find the true signal, or what you would say is authentic signal, right? The truth. So for people that are wanting to be truth seekers and live an authentic life, we, with this podcast and with all the guests that we've brought on, it's a common thread to say, first you need this sort of a financial stability, financial security before you have the means to even consider what freedom and truth and philosophy means. So do you have any words of advice for people that are listening in that maybe have not reached that point yet, but they're interested in things that we talk about, they're interested in investing, and you're a professional investor? I don't know when was the last time you drew a salary, but so what are some words of advice for these people that want to be where you're at? to have the space.
Jason, having financial background is very important. I don't have to worry about losing my job or worrying about financial matters. So it's a great thing not to have to worry about it, because a lot of people worry about these things when they compromise on truth. But Jason, interestingly, the best 1.5 year of my life was the early 90s when I went to live in the UK. I had, of course, lied to the British embassy about that I had enough financial resources. I did not have the financial resources. I was broke. I was often hungry. I used to buy um, uh, uh, potatoes that had gone bad because they were the cheapest, and I used to clean them and boil them and eat them. So unfortunately, that was a very poor time for me. But honestly, that was the most euphoric time for me, because I was experiencing a society that was truthful, that was fair, that was honest, a society that was a civilization, and uh, that was the time when I started um, learning about truth. So I think even in your poor days, you can actually uh, do extremely well in terms of learning about it. But the test of character happens when you don't have clothes on, you don't have food on your plate, and you still do the right thing. So my character can no longer be tested because I don't have worries about food on the table.
Okay, Jan, thank you for sharing that. I think it will be very inspiring for a lot of people that are maybe in that same spot and they're working hard to get out of it.
Yeah, thanks very much for the
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah,
Shayan,
thank you very much, Shayan.
super enjoyed it again. So thank you for giving us so much of your time.
And that wraps up our main conversation. But we're not done yet. We're going into overtime, where Jason and I unpack some insights, reflect on what just happened, and connect a few dots. And go. This is a amazing throwback, right? Jayant was the first well-known person to join us on the podcast. As you said, pretty much exactly a year ago, I think. Safe to say we've come a long way and we've had a lot of these very interesting conversations. And now the world has moved forward a lot. A lot has happened. And it's very interesting to see how Jayant's view of the world has also adapted and changed, but also how ours has, right?
Yeah, but I think while we see different scenery, I think the compass that we hold and the direction that we go is still this generally in the same direction, right? We might say that, oh my gosh, there's storm clouds brewing now that weren't there a year ago, and maybe we need to sail the ship around something, But I think it's cool to put these worldviews into different contexts and still see where they are pointing towards. Maybe similar to him saying, hey, his character getting tested without food, without clothes,
Yeah,
But
I talked to him about this test of character too when we were walking around in Vancouver, and he described it as one of the most inspiring and motivational periods of his life to have nothing but opportunity and kind of road ahead of himself, and there was a very similar sentiment that was echoed in one of the books I just read from the founder of Kinko's. He also said, hey, if you ever hit a point in your life where you have no more vision, no more ideas, go and be hungry and cold for a couple of days. It will light a fire in your belly again to get out of it, So I think it's a bit of this is kind of what I was alluding to with the maybe everything moves in cycles thing that I said earlier. I do. So I mean, the way Jayant explains it makes complete sense to me, and I don't disagree. But I think the there is a need in society to have, well, there's a need in humans to struggle to some degree. The question is, what do you struggle with, right? And so if you, and maybe then that's what culture means, is that it helps you find the more ideal struggles that actually bring you further in life, right? They might give you a hell of a time, but by conquering them, then you are also a stronger, better, smarter person. Whereas if you, of course, go and struggle with some bad things, the wrong things, I don't know, addiction of some kind, for example, then it's like, yeah, it might be a massive struggle, but overcoming it only brings you back to baseline. It doesn't actually bring you to the mountaintop,
Yeah. 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 I even in my own life, when I look back, and if you were to say, hey, subconsciously, feel out what are the pivotal moments that, let's say, forged your identity or forged your character, right? They're usually periods of time where you've overcome adversity. So I think you're right. The culture should, or if you live in a society or a culture where there's a path ahead of you, and there are these challenges that one must face to, let's say, find yourself, or be a man or be a woman, or to grow up or to be mature, I guess it's good. It's better than getting you lost in, let's say, unsolvable riddles where you then feel totally entangled and trapped and unhappy and angry, right? It's a bit funny. Like, I live in the West, but I grew up in the East. I was listening to this guy called Awakening Richard on YouTube. I think he's a very good YouTube follow, and he gives the West views into Chinese society and Chinese politics and how they think. And he commented on the Charlie Kirk thing. And he said before Charlie Kirk happened, he had not heard of who this guy was, and he felt very bad about that, considering it's causing such a stir. So he spent 3 hours listening to Charlie Kirk's interviews, right, and his videos, and he said, "Hey, what's interesting for him is that 90% of what Charlie Kirk's talking about, the Chinese wouldn't care, but yet it's such a big topic in the West." And maybe that speaks to what you're saying about culture and what are the dragons we need to slay to move forwards, right? He said, I just spent a few hours listening to this guy debate what's supposed to be the smartest people in college campuses across the country talk about what is a woman. It's like, if we are trying to solve the world's problems, there are many, many problems afoot, right? With
Yeah.
food, energy, security, wars. And if we're still here getting tripped up on what a woman is, maybe it's okay to say we don't know what a woman is, but can we move on to solving, not getting men, women, and children killed, human beings killed,
Yeah.
So I think you're right. Um, what's
Yeah.
that
So
rite of
this is
passage, right?
what's the thing that you choose to struggle with, right?
Yeah.
So the and that that's not to say that I think that as a society we have to also reject somebody who has that struggle within them about their gender. I don't think that we need to. I think we should be compassionate and supportive towards them. What I don't like is that as a society, on a societal level, we have to grapple with that question, and we have to somehow make it palpable for the minority, and that's the part that where things really does start falling apart, right?
Mm.
Or can at least has a potential to, right? And so I think everybody can do whatever they please within their freedom, where they don't, go and hurt and put violence on other people. But that doesn't mean that I enjoy that type of discourse. That I don't want my politicians that get paid out of my tax money to talk about this stuff for years, right? Wasting time, wasting resources, like you said, as if there's no other more existential problems to be solved.
Yeah. And
there are plenty, right?
And sad to say for the West, right? Just because you're not busy solving it doesn't mean other people are not solving it. So when
Yeah.
China goes and builds desal plants or water treatment plants, or Korea does it, or Japan does it, or Russia does it, then guess what? These countries become more stitched into the fabric of other societies, and then they become more influential because they're actually making a difference rather than just talking about things that other people maybe don't even care about.
Yeah.
But one other really, I didn't want to bring, oh, I couldn't find a time to bring it up during the call, but this Chinese guy, Richard, he also talked about migration. And he said that's something that Charlie Kirk talks about. And let me give you some history on how China dealt with it, right? And it's so interesting because you tell me about Hopper and how Hopper says that if you take away the welfare state, a lot of this solves itself, right? So that's what I believe as well, right? But China, according to this guy, I mean, I knew a little bit about the history, but this guy went into much more detail. He said there are these in China, when you're born in a certain region, you have to stay there. If you don't stay there, you basically, your kids can't just move to Shanghai and your kids get a place in a public school. It's almost like there's a migration within that country. So you need the government to say, yeah, you do have, say you're in the US and you move from California to Texas. You can't just go buy a house and then or you can't rent a house and then straight away say, hey, now my kid wants to go to school there, right? Because they would have too much of a population influx into the coastal cities, and then it would cause chaos, right? So you see, it's a resource issue, and it's not racism because they're all the same race, right? So they were not allowed to travel and to work in another state unless you were given the green light by the government. So you needed a internal visa, so to speak. And this was back in before they liberalized, right? So what happened was a lot of people started doing it illegally, and because they said, hey, me working as an illegal in a factory in Shenzhen or in Shanghai gives me more income than me working on a farm somewhere outside Wuhan. And Wuhan was a very, very, for example, a very, very rich country, city relative to the other cities in China before the liberalization. But once the government started to open the coastal cities, Wuhan fell down a few pegs, right? So people started to leave, wanting to make a better life for themselves. So then the Chinese government saw that and they said, hey, how can we say we're for the people if we are forcing them to stay in areas that are poor while we invest in these coastal cities? It's also not fair, right? And then we get these other societal problems where we get people moving out and having no rights because they can't complain about their boss abusing them, because then they would be deported back.
Right.
So what the Chinese did was the government did was they said, okay, you're allowed to move, but no welfare. So you can move, but you can't just suddenly go to a hospital in Shanghai. If you want to, you need to pay out of pocket. You can't get it for free like the Shanghainese, because the system's not built to uh, to suddenly get these gyrating numbers of people that are coming in for economic reasons, right? So they basically used the most organic way and said, okay, if you can pay for it yourself, do it. If you end up on the street destitute, we're going to send you back home to where your hometown is. And that was sort of this deal that was made that everyone was happy with, right? People could assess for themselves, do I want to take that risk? Do I want to go 3 days on a train to go to a coastal city to then try and find a way to work at this place? And if I fail, I get sent home. And I don't have that expectation that this very far away city or population has to carry my weight.
Yeah.
But when we talk about migration today, it's very different, right? These people come in, it doesn't matter what their race is. It's just the number of human beings coming into a system that was designed to carry a lesser number of human beings,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and you see it also, right? There was so I was not aware of this, but somebody told me that there was a massive influx of North Americans, Canadians and Americans into Mexico, for example, for different reasons, and they go to the main urban hubs and completely overwhelm them. And then the local guys are like, hey, we can't handle this. Like, prices are too high now. You guys are all in the laptop class, you guys all work remote, making so much money, but you're driving the prices up to the point where the locals can't afford anything. Please leave, right? It's not that that they're against them. In many ways they benefit from them coming and spending money, but it just, the system's not set up for it. So it's not racism or anything like that. It's just, you have to be, there's so many factors to consider. Yeah, I thought that's an interesting anecdote. The one thing with Jayant that I also wanted to comment on that I didn't get a chance to is, this idea of copying. It's so funny because it's only, I mean, it's called copying in a technological sphere when you talk about China, and I think it's called execution in in other places. So,
Or iteration.
yeah, or iteration. And so, because like what I do for a living, it's the rarest of times that we are confronted with a true invention of something new. Most of the time, these are just blends of ideas that have already existed. And then really it comes down to who executes the fastest, right? And so I've long thought that the value of the idea is actually far less than people give it credit to. I mean, of course, it's a chicken and egg thing, right? But from my perspective, so many ideas get generated and so many are out in the world, and a fraction of a percent ever see the light of day in terms of execution or iteration. And if you, of course, can specialize on that and you become good at running with ideas, even if your society generates relatively fewer, I don't think it'll matter because more of them will get picked up. So I mean, I'm not saying that it's not a weakness of China. I don't know enough to say it. But I think that learning how to execute these ideas quickly, and if something works, keep it. If it doesn't, discard it. I think you can bridge that gap very, very quickly.
Yeah, you hear all these Peter Thiels, or I don't know if it was him, but all these startup gurus, right, from 10, 15 years ago when they're on Ferris. They keep talking about failing fast, and it seemed to be this hyper new agey, progressive, industrial talk, right? Fail fast, fail fast. But China just does it all the time. They just create a lot of crap, and some will turn out to be not crap, and then they just iterate, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
they just do it on a more industrial scale. They don't have these fancy dissertations on what it means to fail fast. They just go out and do it, and it looks ugly. It sounds ugly, but does it work? Okay, if it works, we'll make it a bit prettier and sound a bit nicer next time.
Jason, thank you. Another interesting conversation, and looking forward to the next ones as always.
Same. Thanks, Lovis. I had a lot of fun as usual.